And I think that you probably are going to see real impact here. You're hearing it from companies. To hear Apple considering doing a plant here in America to build the iPhone, to hear obviously the changes in carrier. But then there's trade, Wilbur, and a lot of people are worrying that Donald Trump is pulling out of TPP. We had Nicholas Burns on the show earlier this morning, and he said, look, this is 40% of global GDP. We need to do the Trans-Pacific Partnership.
It's not going to happen.
Why?
Because it's a flawed agreement. For example, it's fine to say that it's a multi-country agreement. Theoretically, that means you're erecting big trade barriers against people outside that agreement. But the reality is, under TPP, the majority of the content of a car could come from outside TPP, say from China or Indonesia or Malaysia or anywhere, yet get total TPP tax treatment, and if it came in through Mexico, total NAFTA tax treatment as well. That's a silly treaty.
So will you want to redo it in another form with the same countries involved?
Well, the president has said, and we agree, that it's much easier and much more sensible to try to do bilateral negotiations, because the problem with getting 15 or 20 countries together, you have to make a certain concession to country number one. Now you're dealing with country number two. That wants another concession. Country number three wants another one. And meanwhile, you lose track of the fact we are the biggest market. We are the biggest customer. They should be thinking of themselves as valued suppliers to their main customer, not as little piranha fish picking away at the main customer.
But what is the most important bilateral deal you think you need to do?
Well, I think there are going to be lots of them. The NAFTA is probably as good a starting point as any. NAFTA is technically 3 countries, but there are a lot of issues that we have that will benefit us and will also benefit both Mexico and Canada.
I want to get back to NAFTA, Wilbur. This is an important point that you raised, and I want to talk about it. But first, Stephen, let me read you the statement from the Democratic National Committee this morning. And they say, so much for draining the swamp. Nominating Steven Mnuchin to be Treasury Secretary, a billionaire hedge fund manager and Goldman Sachs alumnus who preyed on homeowners struggling during the recession, is a slap in the face to voters who hoped he would shake up Washington. Trump is already heading into office as the most corrupt, conflicted, and unpopular president-elect in history, and now he's breaking his signature promise to the voters who elected him. And this is from DNC Communications Director Adam Hodge. Your reaction?
Well, first let me say I was surprised to see that statement. As it relates to Goldman Sachs, I had a terrific career there. I haven't been there since 2002. I spent most of the last 8 years as a regional banker, understanding what this country needs in terms of regional banks and working with banks. And although we control the House and the Senate, it'll be my job to work with the Democrats as well in making sure that we work together as a team in getting things passed.
So let's talk about the rollback of regulations, which is so powerful. What regulations out there do you think are most onerous that you really do need to take a second and third look at?
Well, the first thing we're going to do is look at Dodd-Frank, and it is way, way, way too complicated, and there's many aspects of it that we got to kill. There's many aspects of it that prevent banks from lending, and we need to make sure that banks lend. We want to see huge growth in this economy. It's small and medium-sized businesses, and we need to make sure that the banks are lending to them.
So the rules had become so stringent that the banks pulled back, and they were lending less. Is that right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the rules are so complicated that many times banks don't even know how to interpret many of the rules. So let me just say, you know, I believe we need to have proper regulation of banks that have FDIC deposits to make sure that we keep the safety of FDIC deposits. But having said that, there's many, many aspects of Dodd-Frank that cross over so many things that make no sense that we're going to look at.
Well, you probably experienced this as well, Will.
Well, I did in the banks that we have.
Yeah.
The average small bank now has more compliance people than lending officers. That's a very flawed business model.
And even at the large banks, the regulators have offices there, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's not the way to run a bank. Government is not the right way to allocate capital. Private sector is the right way. Look at Fannie and Freddie, the 2 things that government had the most influence on. they're not exactly role models.
Would you move to change Fannie and Freddie at this point? Would you move to have these privatized?
Absolutely. We got to get Fannie and Freddie out of government ownership. It makes no sense that these are owned by the government and have been controlled by the government for as long as they have. In many cases, this displaces private lending in the mortgage markets, and we need these entities that will be safe. So let me just be clear. We'll make sure that when they're restructured, they're absolutely safe and they don't get taken over again, but we got to get them out of government control.
This is a big deal. These are huge institutions. You think that, I mean, if we saw that as not complicated, wouldn't that have happened already, that it would get out of government?
Well, I think this administration, it hasn't been a priority. If it had been a priority, it would have. And our administration, it's right up there on the top 10 list of things that we're going to get done, and we'll get it done reasonably fast.
Talk to me about the first couple of months as Commerce Secretary.
Right.
Wilbur, what will be your priorities?
Well, first we have to get a staff together because you can't implement anything without a staff. Second, we're going to go in a scheduled way through the trade agreements, through the ones that we do have trade agreements with and ones we do not, because we're not anti-trade agreement. It just, as I say, we're anti-ones that don't make sense. So there's need to fix the old ones. There's a need to enter into some new ones.
So tell me about NAFTA. What do you want to change about NAFTA?
Well, I think the right way to negotiate NAFTA is in conference rooms with Mexico and Canada, not, frankly, in the press room.
Yeah, okay. No, that's a fair point. But, you know, a lot of people worry, business in particular, that if we're going to see, you know, pulling out of TPP, looking at NAFTA, changing NAFTA, looking at anything else that may not make sense, is it too much at once? Will it create disruption as opposed to growth?
Well, first of all, it isn't a question of pulling out of TPP. TPP
Right.
does not exist.
Right.
It's a fiction of people's imagination at this point.
Well, Obama wanted it to push it until the last days in office.
Well,
Come on.
it was especially a figment of his imagination.
Right. So that's the question, though, in terms of disruption, too much at once. What do you say to that?
No, but my point is, it's hard to say there's disruption when you don't do something you weren't doing anyway.
What about NAFTA?
NAFTA needs to be fixed, but it's not going to be fixed with blowing up the whole world. Mexico's not going to go to zero. Canada's certainly not going to go to zero. But there are changes needed, and I think the markets are recognizing it. Look how the peso has acted. If that doesn't tell you that everybody knows there'll be change, I don't know what does.
Yeah, that's a good point. And when you look at, for example, the UK, it feels like Theresa May has reached out. Is that an important trading partner for the U.S.?
It's a potentially very important one. And we have always had a very special relationship with the UK as a country. I have always had a special relationship with UK as an individual, both from an investing point of view, from a social point of view, and from every other point of view.
Yeah.
So I think that will be a very interesting new development.